I don't mind talking about Taiwan. You have to understand that as a deaf person who was told that I was a washout, my opinions wouldn't amount to anything. I sort of bought it and went the direction of being like a painter, and I wanted to play music and write poetry. The sort of things that I felt enriched and nourished the sensitivities. I realize that people don't go in for poetry very much, but there's some of the works of art that I have done that make a great deal of difference to my sense of safety, acceptance, all of the good things in life, achievement. And slowly I realized I started to snap out of the concussive amnesia that I'm in. And I started to realize that I was actually deceived about my own potentials by the people who had kidnapped and tortured me as a child. That I was destined to be something of a class president type. And they knew that I didn't, that I underestimated my potential. I was just 10 or 11 years old when they struck me down. They really struck hard, and they really struck ferociously, and they really struck young. And I still haven't snapped out of it. So I had problems with the Taiwanese brunette because she gave me the benefit of the doubt for a while. And I didn't understand. I was just too much of a sick puppy. And I told her, watch out, I really like you. And she said, okay, I'm watching out. And I accepted it. I didn't bother her that much. I mean, I don't remember bothering at all. I went by her house one time to have a candid conversation with her. I realized that we were worlds apart. And you know how guys are when Carl Sandburg, Eric on her, loafed his arm, draped irregularly like my mother's over me, and the picture of me and the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway t-shirt. They goobered the Android zone with ha ha ha, queer ball, second fiddle. I didn't care. I mean, I was like winced a little bit about it, but my understanding of Taiwan was very limited. When I finally got interested in Taiwan, it was because I wanted to research whether they were cahooter with Franco. See, the Spanish Civil War is a very complicated subject. And what happened in the Chinese Revolution is a very complicated subject. It involves Chinese nationalist movements like the Kuomintang and Chiang Kai-shek and Mao and so on. And the Buddhists in Nepal, the Buddhists in the Himalayas, not Tibet, the Dalai Lama's people and the Buddhists were engaged in diplomatic skills before the Cultural Revolution. And they were mending fences. But the idea that Chiang Kai-shek represented American interests is sort of noxious. So is the idea of Franco. Two women talked to me about Chiang Kai-shek and Franco as different subjects. I was researching how they operated together because I suspected there was cahooters. Because, after World War II, Roosevelt and Eisenhower were still pretty strong influences in America. One of them was Martha Gellhorn. She told me about Franco, and the other was my mother, who told me about Chiang Kai-shek. I'll tell you the story separately since they were told to me separately. For one thing, I wanted to expand a little bit on the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War was complicated. There were men of great integrity, men and women of great integrity in the anarchist movement, who, when they came to power, abandoned the power. They let the power fall. and it fell into the wrong hands. It's a difficult problem. I discussed it with Greta Thunberg because she abandoned her mantle as a celebrity superstate with the celebrity superstate charisma kid in favor of mingling with the people the way that Roberto Clemente used to make the Pirates mad by mingling with the children and fans. The way he waved to my sister and left a memory forever on our childhood minds. And Greta left these memories forever on the minds of children. So the celebrity superstate wasn't necessarily rewarded in the way that they had come to expect from a starlet, which she wanted to avoid being. And I mentioned that she has to consider what happened with the anarchists in Spain when they relinquished power. It fell into the wrong hands. I'm not saying it diminished their integrity. Well, Martha Gellhorn absolutely despised Franco. He would promise the safety of prisoners and then execute them. And he was helping Weisler, which was unforgivable. And my mother told me about why she left the church. She was a volunteer at the church typing a newsletter, and they told her to type up an article that praised Madame Chang. And Madame Chang was a pretty hostile anti-communist person. But what really bothered my mother was that it was a church newsletter, and Madame Chang was in the papers just complaining that the White House didn't have silk sheets. My mother couldn't stand the idea of extolling the virtues of a woman as a Christian who was complaining about the White House bedding not being silk. She just couldn't take it. She knew that China was impoverished. So she quit. Well, the materialism is very vain. And Ronald Reagan, who was the antithesis of what I wanted from American leadership, he was cruel, he was malicious, he was power-minded, he was hiding his Nazi sympathies. He was a grueling ordeal for me. Used to dance with Melda Marcos in public, because she was a raunchy dictator's wife, like Madame Chang. And these pieces of livery in America's despotism controlled crowds, and they had, their kill communism rhetoric. And yet it ignored, it really bothered me when Reagan would talk about Mark Twain, because Mark Twain wrote very powerful and impassioned protests against what America had done with colonial warfare in the Philippines, and the glorification of warfare as a form of military excitement and entertainment in Hollywood started to get off the ground there. Pretending they were showing real massacres and troops, they staged a bunch of things, and the staging probably fed into the massacres. And the devaluation of human life that is different from us is BS racism. Every human being has a soul. And I think that when I look at Taiwan, I realize that that's the status quo that Nancy Pelosi was fighting to reinforce. And while I sympathize with their prosperity and know that Hong Kong has struggled with the oppressive control tower of the Chinese enterprise, I'm not convinced that the Chinese authoritarianism that does get exercised occasionally isn't a reaction to being lied to and threatened. I'm not convinced that it's not partly a problem of our own making by diplomacy that's not rationally verifiable, that's not free of bias and hatecraft. There are a lot of things that involve difficult labors of reading and studying to explain such places as North Korea, which gets thrown into this issue. I'll show you a book that I believe is probably a good read. It's called Heroes and Toilers. And it humanizes the North Korean condition and depicts their valor. I think it's a mistake not to recognize their valor and their dignity as people. So when you look at the problems that exist between America and China, a lot of it has to do with ignorance that makes it difficult to engage beyond the premises of self-deception. And I want to be very careful here because when it comes to American deception, a lot of people suffer from the propaganda of self-deception in America, but it is not all self-deception. Some of it is deliberate deception. And we need to be careful of that. And when people say the same is true in engaging with China, I believe there's an element of truth to that. But China's history is not one of a warlord nation. They have been retiring at opportunities of domination, leaving other countries to deal with their culture by themselves. There's no exceptions to that in China. It's just that the characteristic of human nature is not proven to be malevolent in China. The areas where the character of human nature has proven to be malevolent are making America toxic. I don't think we should deny or ignore the legacy of bad faith in our despotic dealings with other nations. In order to be inspiring, we have to be people worthy of love. And some of us are, and some of us have been, and some of us will be in the future. But it's important that we not let cruel minds who have nothing on their agenda but conquest and manipulation. We must prevent them from taking power. I personally strongly favor the soft-spoken Robert Kennedy, who is knowledgeable. Because without knowledge, it is very difficult to exercise understanding. If there is an understanding that transcends the ability to study and have knowledge, it was exemplified in the brilliant Korean orphan Chinny, who was born deaf with Down syndrome, who rescued me by teaching me sign language. Such a woman has what's known as the Li, the inborn goodness. Korean Buddhism believes that the ki, which comes from experience and toxic influence of the world around you, is an epigenetic phenomenon that tries to change the Li, and that the proper way to enlighten yourself is to lift the obstacles being presented by the key and allow the inborn goodness, the inborn Li, to shine through. Jeannie had understanding without always being grounded in knowledge because she had Down syndrome and there was a limit to how much she could read and know about the world around her. But her grasp, her philosophy was the greatest of joy to me. And always she will have the status as my very best friend in this world. I admire her to no end. And shame on those people who think that the Koreans are inferior to anyone in the world. They've never started a war.